Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. How important are sports, especially horse racing, to the promotion of economic development as well as a medium to enhance international cooperation, understanding, and development? We will be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at horse racing and the importance it has. But I would like to remind our viewers at first that you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. If you are involved in any type of community access television station, PBS, university television station, media site, media website, whatever it may be, and you have an interest in an internationally oriented talk show, please go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com, go to the video gallery or the broadcasters page, and feel free to download any of our programs. Global Connections Television is a public service that's provided free of charge, and we encourage you to take a look at some of these shows and show them and air them in your communities. Today we're going to take a look at sports in general, but also a particular sport, and that is horse racing. And this is a sport that perhaps doesn't get quite as much coverage as soccer or football or baseball or some of the others, but it is a major player and helps to accomplish an immense amount. My guest today is an expert in the area of horse racing. My guest today is Mr. Don Palmer. Mr. Don Palmer has written 3 autobiographical books, his third one being Driven by the Passion to Own Racehorses. Since 2010, he has focused on his Live Your Dream Living Stable. Don Palmer, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate you being with me today. You have a fascinating book. It is really a very interesting book. I'm going to make sure I get the title right. Driven by the Passion to Own Racehorses by the author and founder of Live Your Dream Racing Stable, Donald Palmer. It is a remarkable book, and we're going to get into it in just a very few minutes and talk about your unique experiences. And you certainly have some unique experiences. But let's talk a little bit at the beginning about racehorses, I should say, horse racing in general. It seems like if we go look back in the history books or Google horse racing, whatever, if you go back to the beginning of time, anytime you have more than 2 horses, 1 or 2 horses, they have been involved in some type of races, they've been involved in some type of events, and of course horses have been really absolutely instrumental in helping create civilizations all around the world, have they not?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I say I've loved the horse like all children, all kids do, I guess, from the time they rode the pony ring at the county fair, you know. Always wanted a horse, and I read a lot about the history of horse racing, and which is fascinating. And when you go back to even farther, the history of horses, that's even more fascinating. We could have 3 shows just on that, and I'm not that well versed in all the overall knowledge about the history, but I can tell you that they were instrumental in, as I say, in war, and instrumental in building civilizations all over throughout the years.
Exactly, they certainly have been. There are many varieties of horse racing events that we're going to talk about as we go through the program. But the one, I think when we think about horses, there are so many different breeds, but thoroughbreds seem to kind of come to the top. But when I think about horse racing, maybe it's because I'm from the state of Kentucky, and Kentucky has always billed itself as sort of the thoroughbred capital of the world. Lexington, Kentucky is the thoroughbred capital of the world. But the thoroughbred races have been, they along with others have been called the sport of kings. Why is that?
Well, number one reason is you got to be a king. It used to be to have enough money to support them. In my book, I kind of turned that phrase around from the sport of kings to the king of sports, because that's what I see it as. Because where else could a guy, if you wanted to buy a football franchise or a baseball franchise, you'd have to be a multi-millionaire. But in horse racing, you can become a horse owner. You can have your own bunch of horses on your money. That's your own sports franchise, and that's unique about it. A little guy can get lucky. Now the kings of the sport, the people who have the most money, they have a best chance of breeding and buying and running the best horses. But the little guy can win. A few years ago, a horse called California Chrome is the greatest story ever. They claimed this horse, they put him in mated him with an $8,000 stud, and they won the Kentucky Derby, and they also won the Preakness, and they just won the richest race in history over in Dubai. So international, a little guy proved that you don't have to be a king to be in this sport.
Exactly. Small players can play, no doubt about it. And it seems as though horse racing is going much more international. Years ago, you'd hear about maybe the state of Kentucky being sort of the epicenter of the horse production in the horse breeding in the United States. But today you've got Florida, you've got California, but you have other countries, Ireland, France, you've got the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, you mentioned. They're key players, are they not?
Oh, they really are. See, I had the chance to visit the oldest racetrack in the country, called the Curragh in Ireland. And it's so beautiful. It's like your track here in Keeneland. It's out in the country in the grass. It's just incredible place. I loved it. My wife is not as thrilled about horse racing as I am, but she enjoyed going to the Curragh, and she always enjoys coming to Keeneland because it's so special. And Kentucky, you mentioned Kentucky. During the Civil War, they confiscated all the horses for the army, and the breeding stock in Kentucky was completely depleted until after the war. So they were set back years until they could get going again with their horses, and it's definitely earned its title as the horse racing capital of the world. And the horses they breed and sell here are the best, and they bring the most money. And the kings and the queens and the Arabian royalty, they've spent all kinds of money, but to trying to get a Kentucky Derby winner. But as of this time, they haven't gotten one yet.
Maybe next time. Maybe next year that'll happen.
My trainer Bob Baffert he was the guy that got us started. He's no longer our trainer. We have others now, but he got us going. But he's had more experiences with foreign-bred horses from the Saudi Arabia and the princes and so forth of anybody. But where else can you go to hang out with people from all over the world rather than the Breeders' Cup? So
I'm glad you brought that up. There were two things you brought up. One, I mentioned that you were talking about the development of the horse industry, and I know one of the top 3 exports from the state of Kentucky alone is the sale of thoroughbreds at Fasig-Tipton and some of the other sales that take place in Kentucky. That is a major financial spinoff for the state of Kentucky. I just use that as an example.
No doubt about it.
Say the same thing about Dublin or wherever it might be. But you mentioned the second thing was how these events like the Breeders' Cup, they bring together people from all over the world. You have visitors, you have jockeys. Many are international jockeys. They don't live in those countries. In the United States, we have many jockeys who are from Central America, Latin America. But it is really a magnet, is it not, to bring people together to focus on sport and enjoyment, and maybe not think about doing other things like war or whatever it might be.
Oh, it's great for that purpose. I mean, it's universal. Horse racing and the love of the game is universal. I mean, everybody loves race horses. They love horses. Period. I mean, I don't know of a single animal that's been more important to the development of the world than the horse.
I think you're absolutely right. The Kentucky Derby is one of the most famous races in the world. It's usually the first Saturday in May. It's held in Louisville, Kentucky. So often when you think of the Kentucky Derby, I hear the announcers always say, this is the most exciting 2 minutes in sports. Why is that?
Well, they've got the best horses that have earned their way into this race. Only 20 horses can get in that race, and that's a lot of horses coming out of that gate. and by winning that race, you have a chance to go on to the next race of the Triple Crown, which is the Preakness, and then you go on to the Belmont, which is the longer of them all. And if you win all three of them, that's the greatest prize in racing, the Triple Crown. And we had one last year, the first time for 36 years. The trainer I just mentioned, Mr. Bob Baffert, trained the horse. It was American Pharaoh, and he went all the way. He's a beautiful animal, and he's standing here in Kentucky now, So they put him out to pasture, and he's going to have a good life from here on in.
Exactly. And once the horses come out of the gate, you're not going to stop watching the race for 2 minutes and 8 seconds, whatever it might be, 2 minutes, 4 seconds. They're going to captivate you. You're going to watch them as they go all the way around the track.
Well, I'll tell you a thing that everybody knows. When the horses come out to walk on the track for the race, they play My Old Kentucky Home. And everybody becomes a Kentuckian at that time. And if there's not a dry eye in the house, I promise you, no matter when they start playing My Old Kentucky Home, everybody thinks they're from Kentucky, and they all start crying.
That's very true. It's a very emotional song, no doubt about that.
Very much is so.
Yes. Well, we talked about Lexington earlier, and there are many events that take place at Keeneland. I think I did mention that Churchill Downs was in Louisville. That's where the Kentucky Derby is run. But also Keeneland, Kentucky has many events. Well, they had the FEI World Equestrian Games that were held there several years ago. And this was these games are held every 4 years. But this was the first time that these games, which originated in Europe, have ever been run outside of Europe. That was really quite remarkable, was it not?
Well, yeah, you had that British Cup here. You guys couldn't hold them. There were so many of them, and they were from all over the world. But they loved it. I heard some great reports. I was unable to attend this Breeders' Cup. I've been to so many of them. This year we're having it in California again at the Santa Anita. Well, I'll be there, of course, because I live only 30 miles from there, so. We'll be there.
It's right down the road for you.
Yeah, it's right down the road,
sure,
as they say.
yes.
Right. And in fact, speaking of the Kentucky Derby, when we leave this interview today, being here in Lexington, the horse that's the favorite for the Kentucky Derby this year, a horse by the name of Nyquist, is going to have his final prep today at Lexington. And we're looking forward to going over there to see him prep. He's undefeated. First 7 races, and he completely annihilated his opponents. It's an exciting time.
Exactly. And even though we're talking about a lot of events that take place in Lexington and Louisville, Kentucky, USA, these same events, many of these events are taking place in other parts of the world. We're just using these as sort of an example.
You bet.
A paradigm of what is going on in many areas of the world: South America, Asia, Europe. Pick a continent; it doesn't matter. It's happening. And horse racing it seems like it's becoming more popular and certainly more international.
Oh, by all means, yeah. Well, the famous race, the Arc Prix de Triomphe in Paris, and then the Royal Ascot in England, where they wear the top hats and dress up real good. I've never been to the Royal Ascot, and I want to go, but to get in the area where you wear those hats, you got to be invited by a special member, So I've always wanted to do that's one of the things on my bucket list, is to go to the Royal Ascot.
And you'll make it. It'll happen. Not to worry. It will happen, most surely. Well, before we move out of Lexington, there's another unique entity. It's the Kentucky Horse Park. And this is not just for thoroughbreds. This is for all of the different types of breeds of horses. How unique is the Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington? And why is it important to showcase all of the different types of breeds of horses that are basically around the world?
Well, I think that's the only place I've ever been. There may be more where you can do that. We have every year. We've had 2 of them. Our 3rd annual. It's called the Thoroughbred Owners Conference, and we were here in Lexington 2 years ago, and they had 4 busloads of us that they took over to the horse park, and to see all these different breeds of horses and how in this area. It's a very unique place, and if anybody that loves horses loves all horses, thoroughbred owners don't just love thoroughbreds. They love, we all love the horse, and we take care of them. We donate to charity that when they get hurt or when they can run no longer, we try not to just drop them. We try to give them a place where they can retire gracefully.
And that's true with a lot of animals that are in the sporting arena. Horses, greyhound dogs, different ones like that. That people, they're beautiful animals while they're in their prime, but they have to be cared for as they fade out and they're no longer able to run the track in 2 minutes, 8 seconds, or whatever it might be.
That's right. Well, that's what we're talking about Kentucky. I came to Kentucky to that conference I told you about a couple of years ago, and I'm a little guy. I got in this business. My book that you were showing there, it's really about a little guy that wouldn't go away, that has no business in the horse racing business. But the first time I went to the races in '53 at Hollywood Park with a friend on his day off, I saw George Raft up there with Betty Grable in '53, and I talked to everybody. So I said, "Hey, George, who should I bet here?" And he said, "Put your money on fullback." Well, I asked my friend how to do that. He said, "Get a combo on it." So I bet $6 on it. The horse won, gave me $40, and we're standing by the winner's circle. I was so excited. I said to my friend, I said, "Man, this is great." I said, "I'm going to have my own horse there someday." He said, "Hey, well, Don," he says, "that's not that easy." Well, it wasn't that easy. He was right.
Don, that's called beginner's luck.
Well, that's
what
right.
That is.
Well, when I met Bob Baffert, he said, "Are you lucky?" I said, "I'm the luckiest guy you'll ever meet." And I said, "I've been married to the same woman for 62 years and 7 children." I said, "I've been gambling on horses and trying to be in the business." I said, "You got to be lucky." He said, "You're right about that."
Well, Don, that's a good segue into your book, Driven by Passion to Own Racehorses. Why did you, well, obviously you got hooked on horse racing years ago, but what motivated you to sit down and spend the time writing this book? It's a really interesting book. It's a fascinating book, lots of photos, and I'm sure viewers who pick this up will know a lot of the people and will be familiar with a lot of the horses, but why did you decide to do that?
Well, my first 2 books were autobiographical. One was about my childhood growing up on the streets of Chattanooga selling papers, shining shoes, swimming in the river. It only went to age 13. The second book, The Memorable 50s, is about when I left Chattanooga. My dad got a job in Florida, and I met my wife of 63 years in junior high. We fell in love. Her parents moved to California. I followed her out there. We ran away and got married when she was 17. So that was that book. But people said, "What happened after that?" So I never told about falling in love with horse racing. So I decided I will write the third end of the trilogy on and talk about how really the love of the game, how my passion for horse racing has driven my career choices in our entire lives, and all the heartaches and all the disappointment and all the thrills and all the excitement. And it's allowed me to meet so many people I never would have met in the world. Some of the famous people. I mean, horse people. We all know the disappointments. We know the challenges it takes. So it's a real good. It's great camaraderie among thoroughbred owners.
Oh, it certainly is. Now, this book, you probably, I asked you this question, you could probably do 300, but given our time limitation today, who were 2 or 3 of the most memorable people that you met in your experiences in the horse racing industry? Maybe they were in the industry, maybe they weren't, maybe they were outside the industry, but are there 2 or 3 who come to mind immediately?
Well, one of them is somebody very famous in horse racing who would have never, had no reason to know me, but Mr. Ramsey here in Kentucky, who leads the owners almost every year in earnings and breeding. He's got the top stallions, and I had a chance to meet him at a conference, and I walked up to him and told him how long I'd wanted to meet him. We got to know him, and I gave him a book. And in fact, I spoke with him yesterday. He ran a couple of horses at Lexington yesterday. Famous man. He would have no reason knowing me, and getting to know me, but the kindest man you'd ever want to know. People like that, He was a great guy to meet. Getting to know a guy like Bob Baffert, who's become arguably the greatest trainer in the history of horse racing. He's done so much. He's had now 4 Derby winners, and he got beat in the Triple Crown 3 times. He got two legs of it, but last year he got the final leg of it, and with this horse here. But I mean, I wouldn't meet people like him, it's just it's like that, and there's so many more I could go on and on. The book has got a lot of people in there. Captains of industry who they own racehorses. It's kind of like, and here I'm a little guy, and do the best I can, and it's worked out pretty good. And I've had more enjoyment and more thrills and more excitement and more heartbreaks.
It goes with the business, doesn't it? Yes. And our viewers can go to donpalmerenterprises.com and learn more about what we're talking about today and to tap into what you're doing. You mentioned personalities, but also are there events? Are there 2 or 3 events that you participated in? Obviously, you've been to Kentucky Derbies, you've been to some of the great races of the world. Are there 2 or 3 that come to mind that you say, this, I'll remember all of them, but these 2 I'll remember even more so?
Yes, there are always some that you remember more. We've been to 14 Kentucky Derbies, my wife
14.
and I. 14. And we live in California, but I think my first Derby was one of the most exciting ones in 1975 when a horse called Foolish Pleasure won it. And by the way, most Derby winners are Kentucky breds. I guess you know that, but that proves the value of Kentucky breeding. But that was a very memorable event. Coming as a kid, flying in from Chicago, and anyway, it was just a wonderful time. And the Kentucky Colonel was here. I got a chance to meet the Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Colonel Sanders,
the founder. Got a picture
Kentucky
with him.
Fried Chicken.
I got a picture with Colonel Sanders. Talked to him, but that one was a memorable one, and another memorable one for me was the year that Spendebuck won. I think it was '86 won the Derby, and I met a friend of mine here in Lexington, and he became a partner. He's an attorney here, Tom Sturgill, in town, and I went in partners with him on a horse by the same sire, but it's the things like that. You meet people. You meet people at a racetrack that you wouldn't meet anywhere else. But while I'm at it, I want to say so many people go to the races with the idea of if they don't win, they don't have any fun. But that's not the way to go. You go to the racetrack, you go to have fun whether you win or not. And what you do, you get yourself a nice table, order lunch, have a glass of wine or whatever you like, with some friends, talk about the history of the game, to socialize. And if you win, it makes it even better, but if you lose, you still had a good day. I have a chapter in my book called How to Make Your Day at the Races More Enjoyable. I have a chapter in there.
Well, that's very true. That's really the number one goal, is to enjoy yourself. It's relaxation, it's pastime, it's to be fun for people. But again, as we've been talking about today, it's a tremendous economic spinoff. I saw a figure not long ago. It was like they estimated, now this was, I believe it was worldwide, but it's like $105 billion a year. This was 10 years ago, in wagering, wagering alone. And of course, that doesn't include the economic spinoff from having these horses that are bought and sold, the hiring of people to take care of them, the hiring of people at the racetracks around the world, the games that we've talked about. You mentioned about the French Run. We talked about the World Equestrian Games that bring people from all over the world to a Lexington or to Paris or to London or wherever it might be to enjoy this sport.
Well, every country has their own big race, like the Melbourne Cup in Australia.
Exactly.
And then Prix de Triomphe in Paris, and as we talked about, the Royal Ascot, the race in Dubai. It's worth over $10 million. You win that race, and I have to say that we had a horse from California win that race just a few weeks ago. I was telling you about.
No small accomplishment.
And I met this fellow who owns it. One of them, he sold his share now. His name is Coburn. He's a country boy, and he and I are talking about getting a horse together, because I do a story in there about California Chrome, about how that horse winning that race. It's put horse racing on the map. What it's done, it's give it a shot of adrenaline, because the little guy sees, my gosh, you can get lucky. You don't have to be a a multi-millionaire. You can get lucky. Everybody gets in the game has the dream of winning Kentucky Derby. You know? So that's what keeps you going, is your dream, you know.
That's the brass ring, the ultimate goal.
Yeah, you want to win the
is
Kentucky
to win
Derby.
the Kentucky Derby. Well, Don, in the last minute or so that we have, what advice would you give to people who maybe are not familiar with horse racing, who maybe would like to learn more about it, who would like to get involved? What can you tell them to help motivate them to look at this as a very viable sport? Again, not getting as much publicity as soccer, baseball, or some of the others, but still really a vital sport.
Well, you know, at one time horse racing was crowds. You couldn't get into places. I mean, there was hundreds, thousands standing up. But since television, you can go anywhere. You can watch it on television. You can go to off tracks. You can see it. It's not as big a crowd. But on the special days, it's always that way again. Horse racing. But if ask us for advice, that's what I started. I call my stable "Live Your Dream Racing Stable." It's in our concept. It's where little guys who otherwise can't afford to be in the game can buy a percentage of a horse. If they can buy 5% of a horse, and they pay 5% of the expenses, it makes it more affordable, and they get 5% of the winnings. So that's why we call it "Live Your Dream." You can be a horse owner with a small investment and reduce the gamble, you know, in it. So we get a hold. To answer your question, get a hold of Live Your Dream Racing Stable. That's us.
There you go. That'll answer your question. And as you mentioned, there is an expense involved. Obviously, you want to be a horse owner, and so it's a lot easier to get together some folks who are able to pool their resources, to pool their money, and to buy a horse and to maintain that horse. But it is a fascinating industry. It is one that is vital to the economy. I just mentioned Kentucky as one example, but there are many communities around the world that depend upon horse racing. They depend upon the economic spinoff from the horse racing industry, and it's so vital to do this. And your book certainly focuses on a large part of this. But Don Palmer, it's been a fascinating book, a fascinating interview, and I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
I want to thank you for asking me to come on the program. Nothing I'd rather do than talk about horse racing.
You got it. Okay. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.